Welcome back to the channel, Hobby1 Kenobi here. I'm going to start working on the Hasegawa AH-64A Apache in 1/48 scale. I always like to take a moment to sort of ceremoniously open up the box for each model. I use a blade to get in and carefully examine all parts and look over the instructions. This always puts me in the mood to get to work and is always a kind of special moment for me. First I will scrape away the molded on seatbelts. This is done with a scalpel, an X-Acto blade, and sanding sticks. Next, I decided to apply a layer of modeling paste to emulate the seat cushions found on this helicopter. I let the paste dry for a bit, then imprinted the texture on a small American flag I found lying around. I then shaped the material a bit, and once the paste was cured, I lightly sanded the rough texture down. Once the seats were painted Tamiya black, I combined black and XF18, which is a medium blue, to get the color of the seat cushions. These seat cushions are a very distinct material, and from a distance appear to my eye to be a dark blue shade. This was painted on with detail brushes and highlighted slightly by dry brushing a lighter shade with soft, larger brushes. Next, I decided to remove the raised portions that emulated throttles on the left side of the consoles. These were removed with a chisel and will be replaced later with pieces of plastic rod. Next, I decided to leave off the decals for the control panels and merely paint the raised material of the dials and switches. First, I dry brushed the raised surfaces with a lighter gray color, then focused on each individual dial and switch with grays and white paint. This work was meticulously done with detail brushes. Eventually, these dials will receive a few drops of PVA glue to simulate covers. There are many new Apache models on the market, all of them in 1/35th scale. Although I may build one of these in the future, I really wanted to give the Hasegawa set a go. I am fond of Hasegawa kits in general, and particularly like that the kit is in 1/48th scale. I never liked the look of the large radar atop the propeller, so I chose the AH-64A version. Next, it is time to scratch build seatbelts from Tamiya tape. The tape is cut into thin strips with a brand new X-Acto blade. I used Annie's photo etch seatbelt buckles. The belts were glued at the top of the seat and draped and positioned with tweezers to simulate wrinkles and give them a more natural look. The belts were then painted XF1 black, and the buckles were painted silver with Vallejo paint. Before the seats were added, I decided to scratch build the two panels found at the rear bulkhead, which I believe are for fuses. These were made with plastic card cut out and 3D rivet decals. The panels were painted black, and the raised rivets were dry brushed with a lighter gray color. Instructions found all over the Apache cockpits were sourced from random spare decal sets, as well as a few from Annie's cockpit decals. The cockpit is ready to be installed to one side of the fuselage. The inside of the fuselage has been painted NATO black. A glue looper loaded with thin CA glue is used to secure the pieces. The bulkhead for the main rotor has been constructed and painted a color approximating the exterior green of the helicopter. The green isn't necessarily the actual shade I will use to finish the model, but close enough for now, since this color will be difficult to see once the model is finished. Clamps are used to keep the fuselage halves together, while the Tamiya extra thin cement effectively melts the pieces together. At this point, I will often involve a little bit of thin CA for areas that might need a stronger bond. There are two thin pieces of sheet metal along the back of the helicopter. These are depicted with thick pieces of polystyrene in the kit. I decided to thin these pieces in an attempt to make them look even more realistic, like the actual metal pieces. I could have fashioned these pieces out of metal or even very thin plastic, but I decided to thin the pieces that came with the kit. These were thinned carefully by scraping an X-Acto blade flat along the part. Sanding sticks were also used to assist the work. After the fuselage was dry, it was time to start adding several other panels along the model. With a little sanding, these pieces fit fairly well. I next examined the detail at the front of the helicopter and decided to remove it and replace the details with styrene. I first clipped off the raised pieces and sanded the material down with sanding sticks. Before I went further, I decided to work on the engine exhausts. These were cast in two parts, which resulted in a seam. The real aircraft has no such seam, so I glued the pieces with Tamiya Extra Thin. After the product was applied, I waited a few seconds, then squeezed the pieces together. Melted plastic oozed out from the seam and filled it. I then allowed this melted plastic to dry and scraped it away with X-Acto blades and sanded it away with sanding sticks. The engine nacelles also had a seam which ran the length of the part. Checking my references, I found that a seam should be present, as the nacelle consists of many panels that can be removed for ease of engine maintenance. However, one small section of the seam should be filled in. This was filled with CA glue and worked away with sanding sticks. Finally, I returned to the front of the fuselage. Two panels are provided, but they didn't fit cleanly. I decided to attach them anyway and cover them up with scratch-built styrene replacements. To create these, I drew directly on the styrene with a pencil, then cut the shape out. Now I was able to check the shape and size of the piece against the actual model. Adjustments were made with scissors and sanding sticks. The corners were rounded off with sandpaper. Once I was happy with the shape, I used CA to adhere them to the fuselage. At this time, I found there were some small differences in their sizes, so I further worked them down with sanding sticks. Sandpaper was used to smooth out the profile of the new panels. Finally, discs were sliced from stretch sprue, and each piece was meticulously glued to represent rivets on the panels. Lastly, I scratch-built the panels found protruding from the pilot's control console. I am not sure of the exact function of these, but my references show that they are quite thin. I again traced the shape of these parts and cut them out. I begin by dry brushing the cockpit's surface details with oils. A quick tip when dry brushing, make sure to vary your brush strokes in different directions to create more depth. If this effect is too harsh, I'll often soften it by blending the lighter color with the larger, softer brush. Next, I masked the interior of the canopy and airbrushed Tamiya NATO Black. Once that dried, I carefully removed the masks. In order to lift the tape corners, I usually use an X-Acto blade, but I pull the tape away with plastic tweezers to avoid any damage to the clear plastic. Despite masking, sometimes small paint bits will still get to the windows. In those cases, I'll take a toothpick, bite the tip to flatten it, and gently scrape the paint off. With the canopy ready, it was time to mount it to the cockpit. The fit was excellent, no major gaps, so I applied a thin layer of CA glue along the seams to seal everything in place. Moving on, I noticed that the grab handles on the helicopter were much too thick, and the attachment holes were oversized. To fix this, I filled the holes with small, square pieces of thin plastic. I then fashioned new, more scale-appropriate grab handles from thin plastic rod. Now, let's tackle the front section of the helicopter. With all of the pieces added, I found that a seam would be visible. To fix this, I applied Tamiya Extra Thin Cement, squeezed the halves together, and covered the seams with thin plastic. Airbrushing the base color, I started with the underside of the helicopter and worked my way up to the top, taking my time due to the many angles and hard-to-reach spots. Once the base coat was down, I mixed some tan into the color and sprayed a bit haphazardly around over the surface. This helps break up the monotony of the dark green and gives the model a bit more visual interest. After that, I masked off the areas for the black wing walkways, sprayed them with NATO Black, and once that dried, I carefully removed the masks. At this stage, I applied a coat of Mission Models gloss to prep the model for the decals and the oil wash. Applying the decals took a bit of patience, as I used a fair amount of Walther's decal solution to get them to conform properly. Once the decals were set and dry, I sprayed another coat of Mission Models gloss over the top. Remember, decals will soak up any wash, so they must be sealed. Given the number of rivets and seams on this helicopter, it was the perfect candidate for an oil wash. I let the wash dry, then gently used Q-tips to remove any excess and reveal the detailed surface. Finally, once everything was fully dried and set, I sealed the model with a light coat of Tamiya Flat Clear. Next, I started to remove the canopy masks. Once the main rotor and rotor blades were painted, I moved on to scratch building a few wires to add some extra detail. I had to make a replacement connector for the rotor as one of the original 4 pieces somehow vanished, swallowed perhaps by the infamous carpet monster. Next up, it was time to attach the Hellfire missile packs. The windshield wipers were another area I decided to upgrade. Instead of using the standard kit parts, I made my own from plastic. This involved cutting stretched sprue to size and shaping various pieces to form the wipers. It's a pretty tedious process, but it's these little details that really elevate the final build and make the model feel more realistic. To finish off the helicopter, I used oil paints to highlight the center panels. I carefully apply a lighter color to specific areas and blend it in with a soft brush. Then I go over with a black oil wash to add more depth and bring out the details where needed. And here she is, all finished. The build took a bit longer than I expected, mainly due to the number of parts and sub-assemblies. Overall, this kit was a pleasure to work with, though I can understand why this subject has been revisited and re-released in 1/35th scale. And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to stay tuned for more updates. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.